went camping with a few friends last week, and I saw something in the woods that I still can't believe. We weren't very far out in the wilderness, just a couple of miles down a dirt road in the local nature preserve, where it dead-ended into a handful of campsites. We thought we were alone. None of the campsites looked like they had been used for at least a few weeks. However, we quickly realized that we weren't completely by ourselves. We had gotten a late start, so we were still setting up camp at sundown when all of a sudden, a piercing cry through the woods. We all froze and looked around in horror as the bone-chilling shriek persisted for several seconds. At first, it sounded like the screams of a woman being attacked by something, but towards the end, it changed and became recognizable, but still a strange, squawking call. It was right over our heads too, which made it even more unsettling. Eventually, we realized we had inadvertently set up our campsite right underneath an owl's nest. We looked up in the tree and saw the owl that had made the noise. Then, a moment later, another owl swooped in and perched on the same branch right next to each other. They immediately engaged in a loud and lengthy conversation of many different hoots and squawks and other bird noises, but thankfully, they never made that sound again. None of us, except for one of my friends, had ever heard an owl make such a sound. In fact, the friend that heard it a few times before had a habit of occasionally raving about it to us, saying that he could never find the sound on the internet, but he knew it was real and wanted us to believe him. But we all called him crazy. Finally, he got his wish, and we all had to eat our words. Apparently, owls could make a sound that was almost exactly like a human scream. They had us freaked out, and because the owls wouldn't stop staring at us after that, we elected to move our stuff to another campsite on the other end. We didn't want to intrude on their territory, especially since they clearly had hatchlings up there in the nest with them. If they felt threatened, they might attack us, and we really didn't want that to happen. This meant it wasn't until after dark that we were able to relax around our fire, but we didn't mind very much. It was actually quite fascinating to us to be in close quarters with such a rare animal for the weekend, and we talked about it at length that night. It made a lot of sense for owls to nest there. Humans wouldn't pose any real threat to the birds. If anything, we would scare off larger predators, and the campers that came by and left food and trash would attract rodents, which the owls could on. Our neighbors actually became a bit of a legend. We would go crazy every time we saw one of them swooping by or heard the hatchlings begging for food up in the nest. We burnt the night away around the campfire for a few more hours, then we finally went to bed. For the first night, sleep came pretty easy from everything I had done that day, so it didn't take long for me to be knocked out in my tent. Unfortunately, my peaceful slumber did not last. I was awoken by the sound of terrible screeching, jumped up in my sleeping bag, unable to fight off the chills that went through my body. At first, I thought it was the owls again, and I was about to shrug it off and go back to sleep until the screaming persisted. Before long, I came to the realization that this was not a bird of any kind going nuts in the middle of the night, but it was actually human imitating those sounds. I just somehow knew immediately. I was in fight or flight mode and woke up my friend who was sleeping next to me. I knew about this myth on the internet that sometimes robbers and other people with intentions use animal to communicate with each other without being noticed by their victims. But this was different. Even though I was terrified, I felt compelled to investigate it rather than hiding in my tent without knowing. I wasn't about to go alone, however. You always have to follow the buddy system in the wilderness, and it's extra important in times of crisis. My friend was confused at first until he noticed the sounds coming from the woods. He was the one who had been obsessed over the particular owl cry, but he also knew that this was not a bird. It was too loud, too erratic, too deep, too guttural to be anything but a human. I convinced him to go with me to check it out. Then, we put on our shoes, grabbed a couple of flashlights, and crawled out of our tents. Once we got our bearings, we realized it was coming from the campsite where the owl had nested. This offered some relief, but not much. We quietly made our way over there. Then, as we came around the bushes, we saw the most horrific thing we had ever seen. There was a half-naked man at the bottom of the nestling tree, covered in blood and dirt, cut up all over his body. He was dancing around with a huge knife in one hand and the severed head of an owl in the other, screaming like a psychotic freak, like he was mocking the bird he had just killed. The ground around him was littered with dead hatchlings and the mutilated corpses of the mother and father owls. It was gut-wrenching, but what made it even more insane was that this deranged, evil man had punctured his own skin with the feathers of the owls all over his body, like he was trying to wear their feathers. My friend and I were stunned, unable to comprehend what we were seeing. When the killer noticed the beams of our flashlights on him, he froze, turned around, and looked at us with the most crazy, soulless eyes, then darted off into the woods while still holding the knife and the head of the owl. Absolutely horrified, we hurried back to camp and alerted the others to what happened. They didn't believe us, but once they saw the carnage for themselves, we were all in to pack up and leave immediately. We drove in silence, mourning our short-lived friends. The next day, I reported the incident to the Wildlife Foundation and the police, but a week has passed, and no deranged owl slayer has been found. I have to wonder what kind of man that is, who would do something so despicable and senseless to those magnificent creatures. Does he even live among society? Did he wander into the woods under the influence of something? Or is he simply a bush maniac, killing animals and eating raw meat like a caveman, with no earthly idea of what's going on right now and what's right and wrong?